So one thing I was going to ask you though is, so when you say gifts, do you mean gifts that just expanded our view of life itself, or are you saying that things that have prepared us as a couple and just individually?
I think for me, I think of this metaphor, this idea of that when we are conceived, that we are born with these it's written on our heart, right? That metaphorically written on our heart what our purpose is, what our gifts, who you are, right? Like I think it was within me at that point, in my makeup. I think of at that point of conception, that was where God placed within me not only him or her within me, but then the beginning of knowing that already, and then the idea that for me it was going to be a part of mine was being a communicator, part of mine was being a teacher, part of it was being a counselor, and that's evolved over time. But it was to help people who were struggling, and that's why I was born with a little bit higher limbic system, where I was able to, my intuitive ability was a little bit higher, my empathy was then naturally a little bit higher. Those weren't things that I created. I've practiced those over time, so I'm more in tune. It's kind of like meditation or working out, but I think those were those original gifts. I think of, I watch my son and my wife and her father. They can put together this intricate, detailed type stuff, and it's amazing. That stuff drives me absolutely crazy. I mean, I will. It adds stress to me to do those types of things. Now, some of it I can become better at it if I expose myself more to it, but I don't know if it's ever I'm going to get energy from that. But when I talk to people, work from people, I can do that all day, and I get energy from it. I'm never, counseling for 12 hours a day or whatever. I don't feel exhausted when I go home. Yeah. If I had to do math for 12 hours a day, or if I had to do something like that, that would exhaust me. And so that's what I mean by gift being different than talents, different than skills, and then also different than wounds. Wounds are things that happen to us in the story we tell ourselves. Gifts are something that you can't lose. You can maybe not develop them. You can maybe not believe in them. You might ignore them, but they're still going to be there. Yeah.
For me, I can think of a few. So, I was always traveling or training while we traveled. Yeah. When we went to Colorado, I spent time in a gym where it's the head coach of one of the UFC bantamweight world champion. Okay. It's his coach's gym, and I went in there for a couple weeks and trained with them, and I realized there that they were complicating it to me. They were making it come off as if it was really hard to understand when I didn't really think it was. And then going into Arizona, I was training with Henry Cejudo, who's the current flyweight world champion for the UFC. So I got to train in some good gyms. And while I was there, I realized that the way in which I understand how things work from a athletic side, and how to teach and share my understanding with other people. I knew that I'm different. Like, I've seen so many high-level coaches, and they're not that good. Mm-hmm. and it's mostly because they're in their own way of trying to do it their way instead of learning from their way and kind of finding better. So I mean, my travels definitely exposed to the idea that I am a coach, I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
I can explain things that other people have trouble doing.
Right.
So
Interesting. Okay, so now it's coming full circle. So when he asked like the most beautiful thing that,
yeah,
I was thinking like visually, like, oh, when we first saw the mountains, but like you perceived it as like,
well, that's why I asked the question, but yeah, I think that was something that aligned me with purpose. Is that what you were talking about?
I was talking about both, actually.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because, as you both have mentioned, this idea of searching, and I think it's that's one of the questions that people we talk about all the time is what is my purpose? Where do I fit in? Who am I? Not just what do I do, but who am I? And some people are teachers, right? Because that's what they do, and some people are teachers because that's who they are, and there's a difference where both can be can be tiring, but the one who is a teacher or is a coach, they're not going to be exhausted from doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
They may be exhausted from the politics, they may be exhausted, the red tape and all that stuff, but not from actually.
Yeah.
And to realize that is beautiful. I mean, and especially as when we're searching, and then to go, oh, okay, it is. It's like seeing, yes, this is my path.
Yeah.
So go over here.
Well, I was just going to say that's why I love the hero's journey, because you can't find that out unless you go into the forest.
Yeah.
You can't sit in a room and think about it.
Yeah.
You have to go and interact and see where your best self comes out as needed.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, I think that's the difference, at least the language that I've been using to separate it, is that the difference between it being an intellectual exercise and this other form of intelligence, and going into the woods and wrestling with those dragons, wrestling with your doubt, wrestling with those fears, wrestling with those wounds and the stories we tell ourselves. What comes out of that sometimes are going to be realizations of who we are. Sometimes there may be realizations of what we're not, and that is just as beautiful, because, as you said earlier, well, now that I know I'm not this, it's like when I work with someone who is a heroin addict or an alcoholic, and then they realize now they're a non-drug user, now they're a non-drinker, and now they don't have to have that label anymore, and the whole world is different, and their relationships are different, and how they go about in the world is different. But there is a part of having to surrender of that old self, or you fully can't go into a new self.
yeah. Yeah, actually what you just said is so perfectly, like, in a nutshell, that's, I think, the beauty I experienced leaving, because it was the ultimate surrender, like you said, of everything I thought that I was, including a daughter, including an aunt, including a sister, including an artist, because I was starting to really attach myself to the identity of being an artist, because I always wanted to, as the ego wants to attach itself to some type of identity. I was no longer a bartender. I was no longer even like what I considered to be like this pretty girl that would, get all dolled up and do her makeup. So I released my physical appearance identity. So I had to grasp onto something, which was then being an artist. So I was like, okay, I'm just an artist. I dyed my hair purple and I wore overalls with paint on them. Like I wasn't being authentic. I was trying to grasp onto something else.
Sure.
So when we left, not only did I sell my clothes, and not only did I, stop completely wearing makeup and really downsize and simplify to be minimal, because we had to be, I said bye to my family, and they were really like they were really resistant to me leaving. So I cut an emotional cord to my hometown, to my identities, to my family, to my friends. And I think that was the scariest part of us leaving. And when we were out there and I didn't have like a job, I had to just be with myself. And he was it seemed like he was totally fine with that. He was like, how cool is this? We have nothing to do all day long. I'm like, yeah, it's so cool.
And that's what I usually call boring. And so,
Well, I was never bored. We were always doing stuff. I was training. We were walking. We were going.
Well, and I'm thinking of Colorado when we first got there.
Okay, yeah.
And so, like,
Colorado was a little.
That was the beginning of it.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
we just got there.
And we were staying with people, so it was almost like being bored was like, it wasn't like we were just free of our time. We were almost like house guests,
Sure.
and so it was a little bit of a different experience. So when we would go, say, drive to Boulder, that was like an event, as opposed to when we lived in Arizona. Like, we lived with my friend, and he went to work, and we were just by ourselves, and there was no commitment to him. There was no like, hey, I'm going to be back for dinner. What should we eat? It was like, see you when I see you. Lock up when you leave. You know, it's
Right,
like
right.
we were living together, as opposed to we were house guests at Colorado. But for me, I was never bored because I looked.
Sure. Okay.
But maybe you can think of a specific difficulty that we had to get through.
Yeah, I think a few of them were just some financial hurdles.
Yeah.
Financial hurdles are, I think those are like the most important things for people to learn, because they're so stressful, right? Like, they're so stressful, and they're so I think they're the one thing, like, you can worry about something bad happening to somebody when they go out in uncharted territories. There's some logic to that. When it comes to finances, you can see how people will start to hate each other because of money, and if you took it all away, they'd just have two people. Why would they be upset at something that's like not an actual thing? So I think financial issues. I think I had a lot of the separation from it already, but I think knowing that she was there, I think it's helped us to go forward together and not have those things come up, because very few people looked at it the way that I did. And I learned from a friend that I lived with earlier. He used to always say stuff like, don't ever let somebody know how well you're doing or how bad you're doing. I don't need anybody to have pity or anything for me. I can figure it out. And so when it came to money, once I realized that, like, money is this physical thing of exchanging value, and I knew that I had value, then it was just a matter of hustle, a matter of getting out there and giving your value in an exchange. And so when you don't have money, you go, okay, what do I know how to do? What can I do for other people? And where are the people that need me to do that? I don't sit back and worry about, I'm never going to eat, or life is going to be ruined, or whatever like that. It's just something that's really simple, I guess, for me. I don't live in the same world mentally as a lot of other people when it comes to finances, but I know that as a couple, we've been in many situations that are similar to the ones that we are out there on, but now we can react a lot differently. Very focused on solutions. We don't have any money. The rent is due on Monday. Okay, what can we do for money? These things. All right, well, let's figure out how we're going to do those things. And it really just set, for me, like being there, that was a good time of learning for that.
Yeah, I think that the more, like, he definitely had more more confidence in our abilities to just figure it out. And I didn't have any confidence in that. And I think part of it was because I really used our lack of money. Like when we would get low, I was really addicted to the feeling of being afraid and being sad. So that was a great way for me to stay connected to that feeling. So I would, if I was sad or I was scared or I was just in a bad mood, I could use that as an excuse. But really, it wasn't even about the money. It was more so like I was just afraid, and I could have just said like, I don't know, I'm just afraid, But I really was like, well, because we don't have any money. But then he brought this idea to me, which was to make friends with the worst case scenario.
Right, yeah.
And it's like, okay, what if we run out? Like, which we definitely did many times. We weren't going to end up on the street. And even if we did, he was not comfortable, but he was confident that we would figure that out. So he had already made friends with the worst case scenario. And I was stuck on like, I want the best case scenario. And if we drop below that and we have to sleep on an air mattress, like my back's going to hurt and blah, blah,
Yeah. This is another thing that I forgot to mention. And it's funny, but when I was at Elmhurst, I slept on a floor. And, my mom and my parents used to say, oh, we'll get you a mattress. I was like, no, I don't need one. And people would come over, like, why don't you have a bed? I was like, I don't need one, right? And like selfishly in my head, I was going back to that training concept. It was like, okay, do I really need a bed right now? No. And again, I was a Division III All-American. Like, I'm competing in college sports right now, and this is probably not the greatest idea. But I was like, if I sleep, I can sleep on the floor, and if I can sleep on a concrete floor, because it was a concrete floor, I'm fine.
Yeah.
And I think this is honestly one of the first times I became exposed to Tim Ferriss's work, and Tim Ferriss had talked about some of these concepts before. And so, at this time when we went out there, I've slept for 2.5 years on a concrete floor.
Sure.
And I had a California king.
Slightly different.
Yeah.
Well, and so let me throw a couple things out to you, and then I'm going to kind of bring this a little bit around. But as a counselor, we talk about there's 4 things that most couples, regardless if they're married, but at some level of commitment in their relationship, that the 4 things that the couple will struggle with, why they're going to come in for counseling, why they break up, why they accelerate and grow together, is the 4 areas are money, in-laws, children, and sex. And those 4 topics seem to be the one where the breakdown of communication primarily happens. Looking into it a little bit deeper, money is my value, my worth, my security, or at least my perceptions of those things. The in-laws, right? That means the other person's family of origin, my roots, that part of who I am. My kids, or our kids, or the lack of kids, or whatever that may be, that could be legacy, it could be an extension of who we are, it could be a reflection of who we are, and then sex, and that could be anything from sex, to other forms of physical or sexual intimacy, and all that. And I think the word you've been using is ego comes in, and we don't know how to ask for it. We don't know when that stuff comes up, on any one of the, are we talking about it, or do we just go inside? If someone's farther ahead in development regarding that, does that person shame the other person for not being where they're at, or do they coach them up? I think most relationships that are lasting, people are pretty much close to the same development, or they're within a certain area, and we're gonna grow just naturally as we, or I should say, we're gonna be attracted to things and be evolving, but typically our perception is that our partner doesn't. So if in my case, if I have a perception of Diane's development because she's told me where she's at, what she likes, doesn't like, what her interests are, and if I don't, if I'm not open to the possibility that Diane's somewhere else, then I'm going to just conclude that that's where she's at, even though I've developed. Now, if she never communicates that to me, or we have an encounter where we're communicating, she may be farther ahead, but she thinks I'm at this lower level. I remember this would happen in our relationship where Diane would get excited about an idea, right, about something she wanted to do with the house or whatever it might be, and instantly I would become fearful about whatever that was because she's talking about the idea. I'm the primary breadwinner or the sole breadwinner. How am I going to pay for this? Where am I going to get the money? How am I going to pay for this? When's the invoice going to be coming? And she was just talking about the idea. She wasn't talking about doing anything. She was just talking about the idea. And I already was trying to figure out how I was going to pay for the bill and what isn't going to get paid if we did this thing. And my silence would cause her to be frustrated and then not want to bring things up. Her not wanting to bring things up caused me, to think, well, she doesn't want to even do anything around the house, So it was this silence that we both thought until we finally had a conversation about it, and it was like, oh, you're just dreaming. You're not actually talking about doing it. Oh, yeah, I want to do it. It just doesn't have to be now. I'm like, oh, I could get my head wrapped around that. And so tell me a little bit, like, with that, because obviously those were some real life things. I mean, I can say, there's been different times in my life where I've struggled financially, but I don't know if I've ever been in those experiences where rent's due on Monday and we're like way short, and you've told me those stories, so yeah. I know you had. So how did you guys partner your way through that?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna go talk right away because as you're talking, it's funny because I knew we were coming on here. Mm-hmm. So this morning I was thinking to myself, if I could pinpoint the one reason that we work, it's that I trust, going back to the first thing you said, I trust that, and I didn't do this at first, but I trust that as I evolve, if there are things or ideas that I want us to become or create, I trust that he is always evolving. Like, he's never, ever done growing, and he wants to be better for him, for me, for us, always. So whether I have an idea, whether it's spirituality or the idea of children or anything, health, finances, whatever, I just have this deep sense of trust that I know he's constantly evolving and wanting to be better, and he's willing to talk about anything. Which leads me to the other thing that you brought up, and that's the silence. That is I think probably the biggest issue after at least talking to women. So many women have things on their mind that they don't say, and they just let them stew inside, and everybody can feel that. And I did that at first, and he just would not have it. Like, it was not allowed. And there was one time, I don't know if you remember this, but we were driving back from, I think, the suburbs, and I said something that he was like, basically he said it was stupid that I said something, and I was so hurt that he said that it was stupid, so I just shut down. And for an hour I was completely silent because that was my go-to. It's like, if you make me feel afraid, insecure, sad, I'm going to shut down. I'm not going to talk to you ever again. That's my plan until he pried it out of me. But we had just started hanging out. We weren't even seriously dating, and he said, don't ever sit in silence. You have to talk about what's on your mind. And that wasn't like the magic pill for me to be able to learn how to do that. It took years of me learning how to do that, but he demands that I talk my feelings out. So I've learned to do that. I've gotten better, at least.
Yeah. He's gotten a lot better.
Yeah.
Communication is key.
Yeah.
And I think, I know, Kylie, you work with, a lot of women and helping them through their journey, through their transformation, through realizing their gifts and being able to name and identify their wounds. And I agree with you. Counseling women, there is a silence. There's this, I think this stereotype that we have about women, that they know how to share feelings and share their thoughts, and they may be talking, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're actually sharing. But equally with men, I've been doing men's work and men's groups since the early 90s, and it's been a huge part of my story and recovery. And men struggle with the same thing. In that silence, they struggle with fears. And if we can learn how to start just talking about it, and give ourselves permission to do that, and if we have someone that can hold that space with us as well, I think for both men and women, it's part of the antidote of that shame, of that fear, of the stuff that rattles around in our head, and then. And it was part of the reason why I really wanted to have you both on and both be talking at the same time, because I get asked all the time about, so what makes a successful relationship? What makes a couple work? How do I, this idea of who am I, what am I looking for, and how do I know? And I think in a lot of ways, what you guys have shared during this conversation about the things that you were attracted to, and that you didn't rush it. It evolved. Those seeds were planted, and they began to grow over time. And there wasn't this. I didn't get a sense that in your story there was this pressure that it had to happen. It had to work. Or if he doesn't call me, or she doesn't this, then it must not. And not to say that there wasn't a little bit of that at different times, but and then as you were, those things that you were attracted to in each other, not just the outside piece, but more the inside, how you guys grew together, individually grew, and then grew as a couple, was really why I wanted people to hear your guys' story. And I know your story's still happening. It's still evolving. You guys haven't arrived, And so if you guys could, just as we're, kind of bringing this maybe a little bit to a close, but what are you guys doing now? And as a couple, what are you guys doing now? What are you guys doing individually? And then how can people get a hold of, if they were interested in hearing more about what you're doing individually as a couple? So.
Yeah, well, I'm coaching wrestling in Belvedere, and I'm also building some online platforms to allow me to do it across the country.
And that's the School of Wrestling?
The School of Wrestling. I have building out the School of Wrestling podcast. I have some other ambitions that I'm kind of working on, and
okay.
That's where I'm at.
Which sounds simple, but it's a lot.
Yeah, it's really busy, and it's just a lot of stuff.
Well, especially because wrestling started last week, right?
No, it starts today.
Tonight. Okay, tonight.
Practice
Okay, first official practice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So trying to do that and stay on top of the, like you said, the red tape stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just doing all that stuff as much as I can, so I can get to the coaching stuff. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I have a podcast that's Coming Clean with Kylie Lewis, and yesterday was 1 year for me.
Okay. Oh yes, I saw the birthday cake.
Yeah, the 1 year birthday cake. I teach painting classes pretty regularly, and I'll probably continue to do that as long as we're in the area. Also doing other types of workshops, DIY journaling workshops, vision board workshops, and just continuing to grow a community of women, like you said, to kind of help us just be our best selves. So, yeah. Aside from that, just taking it day by day.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're also helping people with marketing and advertising and teaching them about creative and stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I think, and I know, Dalton, you've talked about what you want to do with the wrestling program, what you want to do with the School of Wrestling, and similarly different, obviously one's sport and one is an art. And Kylie, what you want to do with your art classes and specifically with women is, I think, in a very simplistic way, you are creating space for growth. You guys are creating space for people to be creative, for people to grow in, and grow to who they can be. And it's listen to your guys' story, especially when everything from the silence of driving for 17 hours to being in that space when you guys were in Arizona, and navigating through that and navigating through the different opportunities that showed themselves as trials. Because he was right, you guys didn't die, and they didn't come and take you away, whatever that means.
Right.
And so it is another one of those examples of it just made you stronger.
Definitely.
Well, thank you very much for both of you guys coming on and being able to share this time, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of the feedback people give us regarding hearing your guys' story of individually as well as your story together as a couple, and being able to maybe open up some pathways for them to be able to go down their own journey.
Mm-hmm.
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.